Hello and most welcome to 1017 of the series. We are presently at the Ramberget, close to the bridge. This is situated on an island called Hisingen, the most industrial island in the region, I would say all of Scandinavia. It's quite amazing to see all the merchandise production, shipping that goes on here. This is also one of the biggest sailing ports for mask shippery. Mask shippery. I think the Danish-Irish shippery it is today. In 2017 I will talk about how to access the cerebellum and how this is what makes us harmonious in our thinking, or making the thinking smooth, functional and effective. To get the cerebellum under control is the most important task of your life. Without having a control over the cerebellum, you can actually have no control whatsoever on the development of your life. You will be literally an onlooker to the scenery that is your own life. You will not be able to fulfill your desires, your wishes, your dreams. You will be left outside of the project. See how everything crumbles down and disappears. And also this sense of not being localized, not knowing where you are. That's a sense that we all share today in modernity. And that is absolutely literal, because the cerebellum no longer gets its much important information on where we are in space. That goes for both movement outside space and a sort of inner space. They are not disjunct. What we have instead is a blockage of space, where we simply divide somewhere along a happenstantial division and makes understanding less possible. When we take away space, we always tense. There are no exception. Space is necessary for the cerebellum to work. It needs to know where it's situated. And by the modern mind, that is an impossibility. We can either exist and have an empty space, or non-exist. That is not the case. We must be able to access space, and you will not non-exist just because you're adding things to your reality. Just the opposite will happen. All of a sudden it becomes possible to exist, because you take in everything else. And this is the start of understanding the very important role of the cerebellum, who controls thinking processes as well as movement. This is the knowledge coming from David Bradle, who showed that the cerebellum is the clocker, giving the clocking of every thinking, every movement, every decision. Without correct clocking, we can't know where we are in time. And if we don't know where we are in time, we cannot correctly clock. So that is sequencing and localization. Two very important things. And we don't localize in this immensely simplified idea of space, like the Cartesian coordinates. That will lead to tension, that would lead to pain, that would lead to lack of understanding. All your skills or your movements or your thinking device will be diminished if you don't control the cerebellum and develop the cerebellum. The development of cerebellum is human growth. That is, it is to be alive. Not growing the cerebellum is being a stand-byer, an observer of your own life. So there is a good take here on passivity and activity. Cerebellum rules all other functions. None is excluded. It rules our intellectual power, our analyzing power, our ability to do math, our ability to remember, very important today when so many people do not remember. Without a healthy curve, fractality in the cerebellum, you will not remember. That's it. Memory won't be something for you. You won't even be able to access your own personal life, your history, what happened to you before. The rich source of knowledge that is the past, your experience, real interactions, where endogenous has met exogenous. An absolute predisposition for any knowing, any direction, and any action. You will have less experience because perception, it's already shown from Lisa Friedman, David Bradle et al. Perception goes down if the cerebellum is not functioning. So there will be less of experiencing. Not only will there be less of you, it will also be less of your own personal experience. You will have less reality and you will have less knowledge. And therefore, of course, you will be lower on the picking scale. This is modernity. It is incredibly unjust when we go down to the reality and we sort of let the curtains of illusions disappear a little bit from our eyes, or we peek in between them. I think it's a better idea. The clocking, the coordinating function of the cerebellum, decides how well our organism thinks, that is planning, getting into one's emotion, how to handle memory, use memory, and how good we are at remembering. And if the cerebellum is not working, memories will be a burden for us. They won't give us knowledge. They will just be bland, dark, and covering, which is often the case in modern day. Memories are no longer a resource. It is something that blocks us, pushes us down, making us more heavy, less enthusiastic. I would call modern memory as a little bit like the thermodynamics saw on the happenings in the universe. The more they stabilize, the more they fixate, the less movement there is in the world. And we are, according to them, approaching heat death. When there is no movement anymore in the universe. and everything settled in a sort of static way. The end of the universe. Doesn't really get any more depressing. Today, it's not unfair when it comes to money. It's not unfair when it comes to resources in the same way as it used to be. But it is, however, incredibly unfair when it comes to access of reality. Some people are more or less shut from reality. They had to do their days with really little experience, and they know it. Every cell of their body is sort of screaming of lack of satisfaction, lack of knowledge. You will not even be able to project language in the same way. That means that you won't make yourself communicable to others. That is also a thing that's different. It shows the unfairness of modern life. Some people just won't be able to communicate what they feel, what they want. They can't access other people's life, as well as they cannot access their own life. Because understanding is something we share, and that understanding we can bring to ourselves to understand ourselves. But if there is no outside stretching understanding, there can be no inside understanding. Because also when we look inside, we sort of project, and that is always dependent on our ability to project, to send out. And that's the cerebellum's task, to arrange thinking in a civilized order that help each thought and organize them. It's an organizing principle, and that needs to be in function before you start to think, before you open the eyes in the morning. You can train it once more, and the method is to repeat, clearly repeat within yourself. Same lines, should be an A4 paper of lines. Repeat them, make yourself comfortable with them, be exact. That must be paired with imagery, because cerebellum is also the projector of body movement. Body movement is imagery. That is also important to understand. There is no clear difference between body imagery and movement. Something that Barbara Tversky showed in her experiments, that thinking is a bodily process. You move your hands to create propositions, relationships, complexities, and if you don't move your hand, you still do it. The hands are still engaged. We understand with the hands, and therefore imagery has to be paired with this A4 paper of repetitive sentences. This used to be the case in modern learning, but because of representationalism, it looks like we're repeating the same thing. What we are doing is an action. And as in the same way, we do sit-ups in the same way to strengthen our back muscles. These needs to be made the same way to strengthen the cerebellum, to make it strong enough. And somewhere in this way, you will start to feel that you can actually activate the cerebellum. This is something I myself have been starting to feel. A calmness comes by, and I can sharpen my thinking even more, and thereby putting the cerebellum into a much correct pulse, a correct beating of the cerebellum, so to speak. It's an intelligent heartbeat. And that is, of course, connected to the heart consciousness. Now all of a sudden we can localize thoughts in their correct position. We can know the direction of the thought, and we can know where it is going. And this is very similar how to we move in space around us. And when we make ourselves smaller, as I just did here, took away the outside space in the idea of making my existence more existable or ontic or more of a being, I take away from myself and no one else. And I think that is a very good example how we constantly make ourselves smaller. By thinking in terms of existence, we always make ourselves smaller. Sorry about that. Good news, the camera survived. Find a comfortable spot here. Sorry about that intermission. I think a good example is definitely Anthony. Sorry. Anthony Chimero or Tony Chimero. I will put in a link lower below. Do visit him and understand affordances. That shows that we think with the outer world. And having a distinction will sort of bother thinking on both ends. Both how we move in the world and how we think. And by making our movement more exact, training our movement, we find another method of sharpening our intellects. This is the movement of the hand I mentioned the other day. How the fooder, the paintbrush, can actually help you to become more balanced in the cerebellum. It's an incredibly helpful tool. It's an extension of our own existence. It is an artifact, but at the very same time, it will help us to develop even further. So, having the whole idea too sharply about internally and externally, or think that thoughts are just something internally, then you are going into deep water. You're swimming above a shark, and you can cause yourself intense, horrible harm. That is one of the founding mistakes of the ontic move, or the founding mistakes of a non-working cerebellum and a body system that is misused. Overtensed, constantly clasping your hands, clasping your teeth, adding tension to your jaw, a tension that goes into your ear and bothers the external projected hearing, which makes not only can't you not hear the sound, you will understand less what is being said. In the end, language is a singing melody, and the most important things are carried by the prosody. I mentioned that earlier. Signing the text is done by the ear, and that is literal. By blocking the ear, tensing yourself, falling together, taking out the surrounding space, you will not access the text to the same level. It will be a great difference. One could say that the reading of the text will be prejudiced. Maybe a better way of seeing it, it would be conformist. It will in a way be same with everyone who reads it. You will get much more influenced by others in the reading. You will not have a free read of the text. You will have in the background others people's views, or the perceived das man, I often think. That makes for unfreedom in reading and no pleasure taken in the reading. Your smile disappears, your easiness of your body, and all the fantastic sensations of the body. The tingling of your knees when you read Dickens, as I remember. The sharpening of the head when I go into writings of Jane Austen. But also getting into the chest when I read Shelley. Those things happen in your body. That means that you're participating. Don't you get any feedback from your body, then you are not reading. You read with your whole body, not an invented idea of a singular object, transcendental reflective consciousness. That is non-reading. That is non-understanding. That is blocking out what could be accessible. So both on the inside, we block out the cerebellum. We don't like its activity. We want the earth to be standstill. We prefer passivity in the reading. And therefore, our reading is not individual. It is common. It doesn't have the same value. And it won't speak to others as well. Won't speak to you and won't speak to others. This is absolutely new within the sciences. We did not know about this procedure before. It's an absolute change. And it has been assumed earlier for some mad reason that everyone, like pieces of blocks, had the same self-insight, that they were a computer or a robot. So you can just ask them, can you look into yourself? Can you understand what is in there? I would say this is the implicit, unspoken assumption of, for instance, psychotherapy. It assumes that you have access to your own thing. And if you don't have access, it's assumed to be a blockage. They have no understanding that you can actually not have the skill, which is the most common. 80-85% of the population don't have the required skill to look inside. That means that they won't gain it in the therapy chair. But another more grave problem, I will go in here, and that is the assumption that it has a healing function to go into psychotherapy. The other day I heard about a person who just said blandly and without thinking about a person who was suffering, she should go to psychotherapy. That assumption was made without any actual knowledge if it was good. That person, he or she, had never ever met anyone who became better, because betterness in this case means that we are a machine and something in ourselves or out of ourselves can be fixed, can be removed from the wholeness, taken out by the psychotherapist and healed. She has never seen that effect in anyone. Still she claimed that. Why is that? Well, it's a faulty perception of reality. It's a no understanding of what knowledge is. If she had experienced a person, really experienced, a thing that is only possible if you have the capacity to direct the cerebellum and thereby making an exogenous projection, then you can know things about the world. But otherwise you will not have any knowledge whatsoever. And this mixing of no knowledge and trying to use that no knowledge as understanding, it's horrendous. Causes people to go to the psychotherapist, trying to get fixed like you go to the mechanics. I also called this earlier technological modeling of knowledge, or the idea of representationalism. Take away the bits and pieces in the head that's wrong, remove them and replace them with something that is functioning, the right transistors or diodes, It's absolutely ludicrous. And the suggestion was already in the 18th century. The mind is like a clock. You just need to like change one of the cogs or oil it up, or maybe remove one cog with another one better working. It is absolutely ludicrous, but technological knowledge is copied right off. It is like a 5-year-old child done it. But we are not 5-year-olds. We are adults with grown bodies, big tummies in some cases, full-sized babies when it comes to the cerebellum. We are incredibly immature, and we need to start learning to control the cerebellum, for that's the key to calmness of mind, understanding and directing thinking. Thereby we can access maybe the most difficult of all, abstract thinking, because that won't come easy otherwise. Abstract thinking is, as David Bradle pointed out, one of those rare resources today. Very uncommon to think in abstract terms anymore. And by not having access to the body, we lose the capacity to think abstractly. We become too literal, we become too single-minded, we become monosemic. And I would say monosemic is being locked in a certain process where repetition plays a great role, and that repetition is murderous in the end. Especially bad because it's not even repetition. It's a sloppy thing that is giving a constant busyness to experience. A busyness that is as a sort of stress where you no longer can localize the thoughts, because they are almost like food in the freezer without etiquettes. And if you open one of those freezers, you don't know what is what, how old it is, in which recipes it should go, and so forth and so forth. That's just a big mumble. And you say to yourself, I order the thing in my head. I have a chaos outside, but my head is organized. I'd say BS to that. The outside is not disjunct from the inside. If that is the order you have on the outside, it will also be the order you have on the inside. You can trick yourself to think that is not the case. The healing function of the cerebellum is shown by David Bradle to be nothing short of amazing. It can heal diseases above and except for what I already mentioned, the thinking capacity. It makes our movement smoother. It can help us to avoid repetitive strain injuries like tennis elbow, mouse arm, canal syndrome, carpal syndrome sickness, and many other things. We can heal us from those things by getting more lenient, more flexible, softer in our movement, more deliberate, more willing, and more intending, because this is going into activity. And that is one of the other reasons why psychotherapy can never ever work, because it's a passive idea. The idea that the patient literally should be passive, lying down almost, and then it should be a fixing of the inside under the motor hood. And the psychotherapist is also in a passive mood, seeing all things in the patients as being objects or existences created by the patient or experienced by the patients. This will further the passivity, and in passivity the cerebellum would work even less, because a non-working cerebellum is passivity. When it doesn't work in a good rhythm, it is passive, just like a heart that doesn't have a healthy rhythm, which is fibrillating, is more or less passive. It's no direction to the heart. It's no willingness. It's a little bit like you giving up the thought of surviving, but the heart done it. And this is what we do with consciousness. we literally take it away, because the cerebrum is where consciousness is directed. This is what organizing your thoughts, your emotions, your love, so that you can love, your feeling with others, your possibility of understanding something, but also your possibility to be understood by others. And that news will help many of these things that Ian McGilchrist has pointed out as being the simulacry, that the stopping of getting into the outside world and constructing your own world within yourself, which is the most common case. An unsatisfactory, oversimplified world that doesn't give any enjoyment, it doesn't give knowledge so you can inform your future action, it doesn't give the energy, the prana, the key of difference that it is to enjoy the world. Everything becomes strangled, it becomes bland, gray and white, the colors disappears from your existence, the freshness of presencing, the newness, everything becomes different and not the same. Just the conclusion there. Different but not the same. Or maybe not even different and not even same. A bland mixture of nothing. Like a cocktail made of frozen berries that been in the freezer for ages and then diluted by tepid salt water. That's the drink of today. This is what Ian McGilchrist is pointing to. And I don't for any share neither the disillusion that's Stephen M. Rosen, I'll link to him and his Apeiron, nor the disillusion you find in the book of Ian McGilchrist, The Matter of Things. There is hope, and the cerebellum is the key to that hope. It is a real, vivid evidence that the brain is not enough. We need to add the cerebellum, and the cerebellum can only be activity. There's nothing passive about it. And this is part and parcel of the passivity we feel, because the cerebellum is not activated. The brain will give information to you that the world is in a standstill. And this actually explains a lot why everyone today almost think the world is static, out there, and sort of determined somehow by really ludicrous simplified cause and effect. It's the cerebellum not working, and to go out to that is to make the cerebellum work again for your health, for your thinking, but also to become an individual that's free and can make your own observations, not communal observations or non-observation that you put into the cast of what is publicly accepted today as a view of the world, which is very common. David Bradle points to that when we talk about reality today, we just copy what the majority says, say, this is what I experience. So not even experience is something we own anymore. It is something that has become a language game of very little resource and very little gain. A language game without an objective, a telos. This is the language game of not asking why. And there I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.